Greetings. This is Minister Michael Muhammad on behalf of the New Black Leadership Coalition, coming to you with another installment in the 13 principles of New Black Leadership. The 13 principles of New Black Leadership. Today I want to cover principle number 2, which follows principle number 1, sincerity. And we hope that you will review our definition of New Black Leadership in our inaugural video, and then review principle number 1, sincerity, and what we have said about sincerity and using this principle of sincerity to measure any and everybody that comes before us purporting to be a leader or provide leadership, particularly to black people. So our second principle of the 13 is self-love. Self-love. After we assess our level of sincerity, the quality of our sincerity, the next thing we must assess if we claim to be leaders is the quality of our self-love. Now, we live in the era of the selfie, and so many of us take a plethora of self-pictures or self-photo portrait or selfies, and we think nothing of it. And we think that we can connect this selfie habit to a sense of self-worth. And to a small measure that is true, but to a bigger measure, it begins to speak of something more insidious in the human character when we become infatuated with the image of ourselves. But that is really not what I want to communicate here. I want to talk about this principle of self-love. Self-love. Well, the first part of that statement is self. What is the self? The self is, of course, our person. The self, of course, is our nature, our character. In spiritual terms, the self, or even in psychological terms, the self is the ego. The self is that which knows, that which remembers, that which feels, that which senses, that which knows. But at the deepest level, the self is the uniting principle. What many of us who are spiritually or religiously inclined refer to as the soul. It is the underlying force that calls life or affords us the animating principle of life. So self-love, do you, especially if you claim to be a leader at any level, do you have self-love? Now, self-love starts with the individual. So let's talk about that very quickly. I want you to please follow and think over these things. Self-love for the individual. That means that I like the shape of my head. I like the shape of my nose. I like my lips, my eyes, my teeth, my neck, my shoulders, my chest, my body form, my body type. That means that fundamentally, I like myself as an individual. I can tolerate or I enjoy the sound of my unique voice, my unique gifts, talents, and abilities. I take a measured pride in that, not an inordinate pride, but a measured, tempered pride, tempered by humility, knowing that I am not the only one with similar traits. but I can look at myself and feel good. I can look at myself and feel motivated. I can look at myself and have a sense of value for the way that God made me, the way I came out of the womb of my mother, and the traits that were inherent in my creation that came along with the seed that was shared from my father. I can look at myself and find self-value, self-worth, and what we call self-esteem. That is a very fundamental level of self-love. But in order for us to lead a community, or let's back up, in order for us to lead a group, a family, a business or organization, a neighborhood or a community, we must look at the corporate self. We must look at ourselves in relation to the group for whom we purport to represent leadership. And so when we talk about new black leadership, one of the voids that is missing, one of the critical qualities that seems to be always missing from those we elect, those we select, those we nominate, those we line up behind, those we acquiesce to, their opinions, their assessments, their directions, and their dictates, is usually the quality of self-love, not in necessarily the individual self, but in terms of the corporate self, if you will. Most of us who step up to lead black leadership, we take pride in our degree, we take pride in our education, formal education, we take pride in our oratory, we take pride in the way our hair is combed, or the style we wear our clothes. We take pride in the associations we formed. We take pride in all of these other usually external things, but we take very little pride in our true self. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that black is a reality. And so I think that the last 8 years in this Obama era, if you will, should have proven to the most naive of us that you can never ignore color. Almighty God created everything in the universe with a color, and the condition of being colorblind, either invoked or by product of a biological defect, is just that, a defect. And so it is defective thinking to assume that we can create a colorblind society. That will never happen, because the Creator has ordained color in every aspect of creation for a reason. And so if I look at my individual self and I see my black skin, no matter what hue of black it is, if I see my blackness, but it does not stimulate any sense of comfort, any sense of warmth, any sense of well-being, any sense of wanting more of that, any sense of taking a high level of self-esteem over the fact that the Creator chose to endow me or bring me to birth in a black body, then that means that I am missing a critical ingredient necessary to lead black people. That means I will be prone to take more pride in associating with people who do not look like me in terms of my tone or color of my skin. I say that in quotes because black is in fact not a color, but just to convey this idea, most of our leaders, most of us as leaders, we are happy to be around two groups of people: those with money, prestige, and esteem, and or white people. And we take so much pride in saying that our position affords us the ability to associate with whites in some corporate, organizational, or social setting. We take so much pride in proving that we can serve whites And so our self-concept is so destroyed in terms of our own real identity as a black person that in our dysfunctional psychology, in our traumatized psychology, we actually believe that when a white person offers an ideal, a solution, an opinion, an assessment, and a direction or a decision, that just because of that person is Caucasian or what we call white, all of those ideals, opinions, assessments, decisions, directions, and determinations are innately superior to that of a black person. And so even though we watch whites destroy every society that they govern through mismanagement, through graft, through greed, through inordinate desire for power and control, even though we're living in and we've been living in that for a long, long time, we still, because of the traumatized mind of black people in America, and in fact, throughout the diaspora, we believe that our black self is somehow inferior to a Caucasian self or a white self. And so, in short, when we talk about the principle of self-love, does your leadership contain self-love as a fundamental element, not as an afterthought? Not as a cliche, pardon me, not as a slogan that you pick up once a year during Black History Month, not as something that you kind of mimic when it's politically correct to do so when you're deep in the hood and surrounded by black people, but when you go around whites or Hispanics or Asians or others, you try to sound like them, you try to appease them, you smile for them endlessly, you cater to them, you kowtow to them. This is an indication that you really do not have true self-love. And without true self-love for yourself as an individual who is endowed with blackness and melanin, and it has emerged from a history and an ancient culture, an original culture, an originating culture, when you don't have that, then you are disqualified to lead black people. And if you purport to have that, yet you use the value-centric system that is Eurocentric, that validates the exploitation, domination, oppression, and suppression of the least of your people, then no matter what you say, you really don't have true self-love. A person with self-love, it's almost, when you have real self-love, you get the same or a very similar rush from seeing, when you look down and look at your body, when you look at your skin, when you look at the skin you're in, if somehow you don't activate endorphins and you don't turn on your mind, that doesn't turn you on in an intellectual and a spiritual way to look at yourself as a black person and know that everything has emerged from that same blackness represented by the melanin reaction in your skin, then this means that you are void of true self-love. And if you don't have that kind of deep, penetrating self-love that I'm trying to express to you today, that men like Marcus Garvey and Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey and Paul Robeson and others tried to communicate to us, then you really don't deserve to be in front of black people. You really should step down, step aside, move over, and sit yourself at the foot of black culture and black knowledge, so that you can grow into a deeper understanding and thereby a deeper love for yourself, and then try to re-emerge to help your poor suffering people. So out of the 13 principles of new black leadership, if you qualify as a sincere person, but you lack self-love, then you have to stop at principle number 2. And work on principle number 2. because most of our elected officials, most of those individuals who run most of our national organizations and local organizations, most of our celebrities, our stars, most of our illuminaries that have been made illuminaries by this world's order, most of them, not all of them, of course, obviously not all of them, but most of them know nothing about true self-love beyond the vanity of the longness of your hair or some other superficial thing that you take pride in, but you have no knowledge of the history, legacy, culture, and originality that has emanated from your people, and that all of that is represented in the beauty of your complexion as a black person. And this has nothing to do with hate. It has everything to do with coming to terms with the truth of yourself and learning to love the fundamental truths of yourself, and stripping out of that love, that self-love, a sense of vanity, false pride, ego, narcissism, and conceit, and infusing yourself with balance, humility, and sincerity to help the hurting, suffering masses of black people in America and throughout the diaspora. So this has been principle number 2 of the 13 principles of new black leadership. Thank you. I hope you will draw some strength, inspiration, and a little enlightenment from this presentation. God bless.